Welcome. You're listening to The Aligned Self, Conversations in Creating a Conscious and Abundant Life. This is Daniel Denovi. I'll be your guide and host. Let's see just where we can take this. Hello, friend, and welcome back to the conversation. Today's topic is probably going to be a multi-episode epic conversation. Epic in the terms of the depth and breadth of the topic that we're going to cover, which is parallel universes, the multiverse, and probable selves. To be truthful, I've been, dragging my feet on actually committing to the episode because it always seems like I have new ideas, new perspectives. And so my goal today is to actually just forge ahead and allow a lot of the information to channel through. Whatever comes out, comes out. I am going to touch upon some concepts from quantum physics. Now, if you're grounded in physics, if you have a big background on it, reserve your comments or what I'm getting wrong or just off the mark for later. And we can have a deeper conversation about it. And because a lot of people aren't necessarily grounded in physics, and I'm by no means a physics expert, I'm going to make this conversation, this description, as easy as possible. Because on one hand, I'll touch upon physics, but this conversation is not necessarily totally supported by physics. I've been a long-term meditator, and through those meditations over the years, I've had access to different ideas, downloads of information. And so some of the gaps are going to be filled by that information. And then, of course, I'm limited by language in my ability or my capacity, let's just say my capacity, my own expertise in being able to actually put these concepts into words in a way that can be easily understood by a number of different people from a different number of walks of life. Now, at the forefront here, I'm anticipating having a couple of episodes around this idea. I might be able to compress it all into one. I want to touch upon the definition of the multiverse or parallel universes or how that might be structured, and then the ramifications of our interaction with it, and explore manifesting, our choices, our beliefs, and what does that manifest? What's the concept of time and simultaneous time? You've probably heard in one form or another that everything's happening at once. The past, the present, and the future, all is stacked on top of each other. I'm also going to come at this from the perspective of a psychic. What does it mean about your future? Because I can tell your future based on your current core beliefs or activities. But also, at any given point in time, you can change that potential future. And then, what about the Mandela effect? You probably have heard about the Mandela effect, and that is that a certain number of people remember Nelson Mandela dying in prison. Well, a bunch of us remember Nelson getting out. That's me. I remember him getting out. There's a whole story there, but because there's this remembered discrepancy, and there's several reasons for that, one of which is our memories aren't that reliable, as a rule, because sometimes we remembered what was inferred, not necessarily what actually happened. So the Mandela effect refers to different events in history that are remembered differently by a portion of the world, portion of society. We remember it one way, and if you were to look it up on Google or in the encyclopedia, there's a different set of facts. Did we jump timelines, or what's going on? If you're curious about the Mandela effect and some of the examples, do an internet search for examples of the Mandela effect. My wife and I just recently watched the movie Passengers again. We watched it when it first came out. I think it was like 10 years ago. And if you haven't seen it, it is a movie well worth watching. But she remembered a different ending, and I kind of remembered the different ending also. In our research, we researched on the internet, there were 3 different endings, but none of those were the ending that we remembered. So as we discussed it further, we kind of came to the conclusion that what we remembered is the ending we wished had been written. So I'm starting to go down some rabbit holes and go off on some tangents. So before we get too far, I'll create a basic definition of what the multiverse is or what the parallel universes are. There's an idea that there is an infinite number of parallel universes or alternate universes than the one we are currently experiencing. And the one I'm experiencing may be slightly different than the one you're experiencing. So we're talking about multiple universes all occurring at the same time. So to really grasp this, in your mind, divorce yourself from the idea that these are physical universes. Or maybe they are physical universes, but they are on a different vibrational plane, a different frequency. For instance, cable TV. Now, depending on the package that you have, you could have between 200 and 400 different channels. Some of these channels are pretty much alike, slightly different. But you don't necessarily tune in to every one of those channels. You select it with the frequency that's assigned to that particular channel. So all these different shows, all these different channels are occurring at the same time, but you're only tuned in to one of those. This also could be represented by a radio, a music radio. You have a number of different stations that are broadcasting on that radio band, and it is dependent upon the frequency you tune into as to which music you're actually listening to, or the genre of music that you're listening to. And then those frequencies are shared. There is a broadcast range. If you really want to, get the esoteric effect of this. Let's say that the radio stations that are in the Miami area are going to be different than the radio stations that are available, or the radio channels that are available in Dallas. They're using the same frequency, but they're broadcasting at a different frequency or a different wattage. So in Miami, those signals only go out so far until they fade off. So again, multiple channels, multiple shows, multiple broadcasts occurring at different frequencies. But by and large, you can only experience one of those channels at a time, dependent upon what you tune into. Now, let's break down timeline for a minute. A timeline, the concept of multiple timelines and people jumping timelines, I think it's really convoluted, because a timeline is a linear progression of events that is conceptual in nature. Our idea of time is an agreed construct. And whether time moves slowly, or that we look back to the past or to the future, it's a perspective that we take on. Over the years, since I was 16, I've driven almost 2 million miles. Thank goodness I didn't put those miles all on my own vehicles. But when you drive that many miles, sometimes you encounter an accident where you coincide or have this synchronistic event with another driver. On 3 different occasions, there's been someone that has run a stop sign and broadsided me. In each of those events, I was able to anticipate or see it coming and make evasive action, which was usually to veer off to the right so they didn't hit me broadside, like T-bone me, and it was more of a glancing blow, and we all walked away. But I can remember on a couple different accidents in making that evasive maneuver. One time I bounded over a manhole cover which kind of careened the vehicle out of control, and then I attempted to make several maneuver changes or course corrections in order to keep control of the vehicle. So in the span of a couple seconds, I remember making probably a dozen different choices, different changes in my direction, in order to avoid different things, trees and mailboxes and different things like that. In that moment, it was as if time slowed down, and I was hyper aware of what was going on. The end result in that experience is that I realized that time is a mental construct. Here's a different perspective. Let's say that you don't measure time by years or by the hour. Let's say that you measure time by the millennia, by thousands of years. If you have a perspective of 1,000 years, a decade seems like just a minute, relatively speaking. And in the context of eternity, our lives are a mere blip, just a snap of the fingers in all that is. And so this brings us to Einstein and the theory of relativity. Essentially, everything is energy, and it's our perspective and the vibrational nature of that energy that gives it mass. Just to throw a little Einstein quote in there, when he was getting on the train, he asked the conductor, "What time does Zurich arrive at this train?" So let's talk a little bit about physics. Back in the 5th century, the Greeks came up with this concept of multiple worlds. And they proposed that everything in the universe is composed of small, indivisible particles called atoms. 5th century now. Atoms. These atoms are the fundamental building blocks of all matter. Well, as scientific understanding has progressed, it was discovered that atoms are not indivisible at all, but they are actually made up of subatomic particles, protons, neutrons, and electrons. They are theoretically held together by a field that is electrically charged, and they give off and take on electrons, changing the state at different points. But as science progressed even more, further exploration in quantum mechanics revealed that even smaller particles, such as quarks and leptons, would make up protons and neutrons. As we began to explore and observe matter at smaller and smaller increments, the distance between these different particles or waves were getting bigger and bigger, until they arrived at the question, what exactly is holding these things together? Because at the smallest level of matter, everything seems to be energy. This led to the idea that everything is not just particles, but also waves of probability. At the quantum level, at the subatomic level, particles are seen as excitation in fields, excited particles in a field, meaning that what we perceive as solid matter is actually energy vibrating at different frequencies. Are you with me so far? Smaller and smaller particles until you get so small that it appears to be nothing but energy. This is where I want to talk about the observer effect. There was an experiment called the double slit experiment, essentially a steel plate with two slits, two vertical slits cut out in this steel panel. They fired particles from an electron gun at the two slits. When you fire this stream of electrons at the two splits, it creates an interference pattern, which only allows certain electrons to get through the slits and form a pattern on the wall behind it, or the panel behind it. It's basically like aiming a shotgun, which has a bunch of little pellets at a couple slits. What actually gets through the slit on either side forms a pattern. In that observation, it indicated that the pattern was a wave-like behavior. However, when they began observing or trying to measure which slit the particles were getting through, the interference pattern disappeared, and the particles behaved like individual particles instead. This is termed as the observer effect. The outcome of the experiment was dependent upon what the observer was actually measuring. This is similar to the riddle, if a tree falls in a forest, does it make a sound? Well, no. Not unless there's someone there to hear it. When it falls, it creates a vibration. But it's not a sound until someone can actually interpret the vibration as a sound. So, okay, let's go a little deeper here. So you have a particle that exists in a potentiality. It doesn't have any form yet. So this creates the idea of superposition. And so superposition in quantum mechanics refers to the idea that quantum system can exist in multiple states at once until it is measured or observed. So the fabric of the universe is actually in a state of probability or possibility. So far in our description, nothing is existing in time and space. It is held as a potentiality. Now, when we were looking at particles, Einstein observed a phenomenon that he referred to as spooky action at a distance. This has since been described as quantum entanglement, and it's a phenomenon where two or more particles become interconnected, maybe share a frequency, in such a way that the state of one particle instantly influences the state of the others, regardless of the distance between them. This was a Nobel Prize awarded for this type of experiment in 2022. They observed that this connection remains even if the particles are light years apart. Distance does not matter. Distance is not relative. The moment there was a change in one particle, there was a change in the other particle instantaneously. Again, we talked a little bit about time, but what that experiment actually did is it redefined our idea of time for a long time, that nothing moved faster than the speed of light. But this experiment that occurred in 2022, or that they received the Nobel Prize in 2022, it rewrote that idea, that our idea of time is probably wrong. Let's consider a more practical metaphor. let's pretend two dice are entangled particles. If you roll one dice as a 6, the other die across the room will instantly show a 6 as well, no matter how far apart they are. The implication of this is kind of interesting. If there's suddenly no such thing as time, then you can create an intention to a part of you at an earlier time in life. I think this is one of the reasons why my work with subpersonalities works so well. But you can even consider this, and I'll probably expand on this when we talk more about the manifesting aspect of this, but you can send an intention. You can send love to a younger part of you when it would have made a difference, when you felt all alone, when you felt like nobody cared, or maybe you felt lost and you didn't think you'd get out of the situation that you were in. You can think back to that moment. Tune into that person that you were then, because you're no longer that person physically or mentally, but you can tune into who you were in that moment and send that aspect of you unconditional love and support. You can be the angel to your younger self. So, okay, let's continue this conversation getting into multiple timelines. So we have superposition. Particles exist in a superposition, meaning that they can change into and morph into any state that is observed or intended. You can also refer to observation as an intention. So since superposition implies that a particle can exist in multiple states simultaneously, this suggests that at a fundamental level, multiple potential outcomes can also coexist. If we apply this to the macroscopic world, the really, really small stuff, it suggests that every possible decision or outcome could exist simultaneously in a superposition state. So each choice we make could lead to a different reality, creating multiple timelines, quote unquote, where different versions of events play out. How I've described this in the past is the paradox of free will and destiny. The moment you create an intention, desired outcome, the universe conspires on your behalf. Your angels get together and they conspire and they lay out a path for you. They set up all the meetings, all the synchronicities, all the events that are going to have to occur in order for your outcome to unfold. So your choice in the intention is your free will. Once you make that choice, there is a path laid out before you, your destiny, that is in alignment with that intention. If you change your mind at any point in time, or maybe you have doubt, suddenly the angels stop and they say something's changing. There's a shift. So there's now a new potential, a new possibility, a new probability that you've created with your decision. They now conspire and lay out a new path for you. Now, let's say, for the sake of discussion, we imagine that your life path, your timeline, your personal timeline, is a path, is a journey. According to our theory on probable realities now, everything exists in superposition. No matter how small the choice, it could splinter off into several possible or probable realities. But let's say it's a major life choice. You come to a fork in the road where you can make one of two decisions. Now, from your perspective, it's only two decisions, yes or no, left or right. I'm at the fork in the road. Do I go right or do I go left? Well, I also could choose to go back. I could go back home, or I could choose to do nothing and sit there. That changes time. It creates a whole scenario of synchronistic events that potentially aren't going to happen in that decision. If you decide to change the pattern of how you brush your teeth, it could literally change the axis or the rotation of the planet on its axis, as far as your experience goes. Now, this is where we're going to get a little esoteric in the conversation. Imagine all that is, just a field of consciousness. You can think of this as God before anything was created. Well, if you are the only entity that exists, and suddenly you have a point of awareness, and you wonder, who am I? What am I? And since all things are instantaneous in that question of identity, you give birth to a universe, a galaxy, galaxy upon galaxy, in order to answer this question. Now, if you're in the field of all it is, It's like a fish in water. You don't have a contrast to know what the difference is. And so that's one idea of why we exist in duality. We have the presence of something and the lack of something. We as a human being, a spiritual being immersed in the human experience, have the experience of contrast. And so in the interest of God, Goddess, all that is, learning more about itself, it makes sense that any possible outcome be explored. So energetically, every decision that could be made is made and extrapolated out in its own reality. All these different universes, timelines, potentialities exist in the unified field. Let's say that you're at a point where you have a choice to stay in the job you're in or leave that job. There were many choices before that, but that's where we are in this moment. And let's say that you decide to leave the job. Well, there's a reality, there's a timeline that's created where you stay in that job and play out that story, play out that scenario energetically. And then the moment you take the leap and leave, there is a path that's laid out for you until you make a more informed choice or a different choice that's going to splinter off into a new possibility. Theoretically, you can shift timelines or shift realities 10 times a day just by making different choices. But most people don't operate that way. You have a set of core beliefs. You have a core of probable patterns of behavior that you're going to engage in. Facebook, Google rely on that. It's the algorithm. You're going to make predictable choices based on the structure of your belief system of who you are on any given day from hour to hour. So even though there's an infinite number of potential realities going on at any given moment, it is your beliefs, your core beliefs by and large, your values, which kind of limit down the number of possibilities that are available for you on any given moment. And so you're going to have or experience a variation on a theme. You can shift from timeline to timeline, reality to reality, multiple times, but for the most part, it's fairly predictable on the timeline that you're going to stay on. On those rare occasions that I do readings for people, when I do the reading, I tell them this is the predictable future based on who you're currently being. If something comes up that you do not like, it's possible that you can change your future. There are certain aspects of your life, certain aspects of your experience that have a greater amount of momentum than other paths. It's not that that path can't be rearranged or changed, but it would be akin to, I guess, trying to stop a team of wild horses, wild runaway horses. It's not impossible, but it's difficult. And that's because you have more of your identity, your core beliefs tied up into that path. Sometimes I have people ask me about a relationship. Now, a relationship, you have two people involved. And while there may be a predictable outcome or dynamic that's there, and I can usually read that, whether or not it will be successful or where you will end up, I can give you a sense of probability. Most recently, I had someone ask me about the potential outcome for a relationship, and I said there's a 20% chance of success, an 80% chance of failure that it's going to end up in, not working. But you're both free agents. You can both make choices. Sometimes my wife will ask me, how's this going to turn out? And I'll say there's currently too many variables that have yet to be decided for a definitive outcome. I can see several probable outcomes based on the potential choices that are going on right now. Something I didn't specifically say so far is that even though there's probable realities, probable parallel universes, there's also probable yous. Let's say in this lifetime, you're nice, you're kind, you're well-mannered. There's another universe, another probable you that is disobedient, that is mean, not that nice to be around. And then every variation in between. Now, here's something to think about. Let's say that the recent assassination attempt of Donald Trump at the rally, where he just slightly turned his head and it grazed his face, that was one probable reality. There was another probable reality where the marksman was, I guess, dead on. And then another probable reality where it was a complete miss. He was caught well beforehand. So if you're in the reality right now where the assassination attempt was not successful and it just grazed his face and the tip of his ear, then we are in an intersection point together. We are having a shared experience. And again, even though we're having a shared experience or this intersection point, this reality is going to play out a particular way given what went on there. There's been this tacit agreement, this unspoken agreement that we're going to participate in this story. And that brings me to another point. There are conscious agreements and unconscious agreements, agreements that are made on a higher plane or by our higher self, and agreements that we made before we even incarnated. This is where we start to get a little esoteric. And I'll probably continue this conversation in the next episode. And in the next episode, I'm going to talk about how I myself scripted a new reality and cheated death. I'll also talk in more depth about our shared experiences and living in a community of souls and those agreements, as well as actions that you can take for yourself to manifest a new timeline or to jump a reality. But that also comes with a warning. Now, and I'll explore even the whole concept of going back in time. There's been a lot of, in movies and stuff, they sometimes my northern accent slips out and I crack myself up. But in the context of movies, it's been a big theme over the years of people to go back in time and change an event to avert a catastrophe but in this idea of multiple timelines, every probable reality is played out. And so while it's possible to go back and change something in the past, there is the ramification of the butterfly effect. You don't know the ripple effect of that decision, how it's going to play out, or what was put in place by superintelligence for everything to synchronistically work out. Oh, this just popped in my head. Before I leave, I need to explain this. And it's just another perspective, another way of looking at this whole dynamic. Of all the probable realities, potentialities that exist, you could consider yourself sitting at a computer screen and having access to the cloud. All these probable realities, all the potentialities exist in the cloud, wherever that is. It's on a chip somewhere, on multiple devices, multiple computers, spread all across the world in the universal mind. So even though all this information is in the cloud, held in the cloud, it is based on the command that you give that determines what you download, what you experience. You see, a lot of people have difficulty with the multiverse kind of concept is because we want to imagine, the same thing with heaven and hell, we want to imagine things as a place because we're grounded in the 3D, perception. But if you think of it in terms of an energetic vibrational state, and in that state, it's just as real as something that is in material or has mass. It's just that it's in a different state of flux. So I think I'm at the end of this conversation today. If you've enjoyed this so far, then meet me in the next episode right after this one. Until next time, this is your friend and host, Daniel Denovi, urging you to follow your bliss. Live your life from inner signals. Be inner directed as you engage in the epic adventure.